So the purpose and scope today, it's really just to validate a lot of what you all do. So much of what happens in the caregiving world happens behind the scenes and goes unrecognized. It's literally invisible labor. And so that's why when we say, unless you're in it, you don't know, this is why, right? Because what people see and what actually takes to do what you do can be very different things. And so we're just going to validate that and maybe give you a little bit of insight as to why it feels like, even if I didn't do anything today, I'm still exhausted, right? Because on paper and the reality, things can look very differently, right? So I am a therapist, but this is not a therapy session. This is just education. But of course, if you want to talk with me more in depth about your specific situation, if you're interested in participating with me on a therapeutic level, I am available for that as well. We have the Caregiver Wellness Initiative here with Alabama Lifespan Respite, and that is a grant-funded opportunity to provide mental health services from a licensed professional to caregivers across the state free of cost. Okay. But of course, you are welcome to listen. You can put stuff in the chat. If it's a little bit too much for you and you want to walk away, that's fine too. This is a very open space, and you take what you can and leave the rest. Okay. So many of us feel very exhausted, even when, if we write down all the tasks of the day, it maybe doesn't look like too much has been done. Um, but we are still exhausted, right? And so there can be some kind of disconnect there. And it can be very, very frustrating because if our labor isn't visible, oftentimes it's underestimated by other people, right? And sometimes even by you yourself as a caregiver, right? And this is a great breeding ground for shame, right? Where it's like, I only did two things today and I feel like I ran a marathon, right? Or, I just woke up. Why am I so tired, right? Or if you're caregiving for somebody who has a progressive disease, right, like dementia, or something like that, a lot of times people think, well, it's just making sure, they get to the doctor or making sure they have their meals, right? They don't realize all the work, all the mental and emotional work that goes along with caregiving, okay? And even too, if you're raising children who have disabilities, it's not just about, keeping them active or keeping them in school, right? All those in their doctor's appointments, all of that is true. But it is different than a neurotypical or a typical developed child, right? There's a whole other layer and sometimes multiple layers of depth that go along with caregiving and raising children who have disabilities, right? But again, if you're not in it, you don't know. And so from the outside looking in, it's like, well, yeah, why are you so tired? You're just raising kids, right? Or why are you so tired? You're just, making an extra meal, right? But that's not what it is. And we all know that that's not all that it is, right? Invisible labor is mentally taxing. Okay. It requires constant attention, anticipation, and adjusting, right? And often without recognition or relief, right? So physically, you may not be doing all the things. Most of you are, but physically, you may not be doing a lot. But the mental load, right? The pre-planning, the foresight, the scheduling, the pivots when things inevitably go awry. That takes brain power. And our brains actually consume, I think it was like 80% of like all the food that we eat goes towards powering the brain. Okay. So our brains are always, always busy, even outside of a caregiving role. So then when you add that on, where you're literally the axis that everything else revolves around, that's a lot. And when you don't have recognition and you don't have relief, and it's just this constant thing, it can definitely erode some of our sense of self and our energy levels and leave us very, very fatigued. Okay. And so this can explain why caregiving feels heavy, even when there aren't a lot of obvious tasks happening in the moment. Okay. So I just want to validate that for you. Yes, you're tired. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's a lot. And yes, there's a reason for it. Okay. Biologically, this is just what happens, right? We get tired. So, a large portion of what you do every day happens in the mind, right? Like I said before, tracking appointments, remembering medications, right? Especially if they're changing all the time, right? Or, you get a new prescription and it's, affects the side effects or the symptoms of that medication cause behaviors and expressions that now you have to kind of navigate around and try to go back. Well, what was it that I gave them that made them feel this way, right? Anticipating needs, right? Some of you all are caring for people who are nonverbal. And so you have to be very, very concise with how they communicate, right? You have to translate body language, facial expressions, right? And that takes a lot of mental power. And so also having these contingency plans in your head at all times, right? Well, if I take Jane to the respite place and she has a seizure, or maybe they get overwhelmed and they have a meltdown, like how do you manage that? How do you navigate that, right? And so all these things are going on at the same time in the background. It's like you have 47 tabs open, right? And you're running parallel mental lists too, right? So it's not just what's happening today, it's what's happening tomorrow, what's coming up next week, what might go wrong, what is still waiting for resolution that you haven't figured it out yet, right? So as I say it out loud, you probably are nodding your heads, right? Yes. And maybe it's something you never thought about. Like, wow, really, when I think about it, that's a lot. That's a lot on my shoulders, right? Because labor doesn't always look like action. It doesn't always look like you're doing something, right? And so it's easy for other people to miss that, and it's easy for us to miss it too, right? But that cognitive labor, that consumes real energy, okay? And it doesn't turn off easily. So it's not like you clock out and you stop thinking about it, right? Oftentimes you're laying in bed at night thinking about it, right? Um, and rethinking and re-strategizing, and that didn't work. Let me do this other thing, right? How can I make this easier for my loved one? That's a lot. That's an absolute energy drain, okay? So, in addition to that cognitive labor, that thinking, that planning, that anticipating, that managing, that monitoring, there's emotional labor on top of that, right? Managing other people's emotions, especially if you have children, right? They're learning too. And so there's a learning curve for both of you that you have to navigate. And you also have to make sure that you keep your own emotions in check so you don't fly off the handle or do or say something that you feel guilty for that you have to go back and repair, right? So staying calm during stressful situations, absorbing fear and frustration, right? Some of you are caring for people who are aware of their diagnoses. And so there's maybe some emotional things there that they're trying to navigate, right? What if they have Parkinson's? What if they have dementia? What if they've had a stroke and now overnight their whole life is different, right? You carry that, okay? You might not be a licensed therapist, but you are the one who's carrying that emotional labor, right? And maintaining stability while overwhelmed is exhausting. Okay. Take it from me. I know, right? Um, and we do it with love, and we do it because we have to, and we do it because we want to. But that does not take away the strain of that job. Okay. Often you are acting as emotional buffers, right? So protecting other people from distress while you're carrying your own. Maybe having to explain certain behaviors or expressions to people in your family, or even just going out to dinner, right? Going to a restaurant. You have to be that buffer between your person and the outside world, okay? And so it's rarely acknowledged because it's relational. Okay. And sometimes, oftentimes, relational labor is expected and not always appreciated. Okay. People don't realize how much they lean on you until you remove yourself. Then they're like, oh, right. Um, but oftentimes we don't remove ourselves, right? We just keep going, and that can be exhausting. So why does this lead to mental fatigue? Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious, right? It takes a lot of energy to do what we do. Um, and a lot of the tracking and the logistics is done mentally, okay? Um, and your brain doesn't really fully power down even on the quiet days, right? It's still scanning. I have heard from so many caregivers was like, I can't even really fully sleep because as soon as I get into that deep, restful sleep, they're up, right? I hear the alarm for the back door going off at 3 a.m. because mom decided she was going to go to work and she's 97 and hasn't had a job in 10 years or longer, right? And so even when you're resting, you're not resting, okay? Um, you can't always point to one thing that leaves you exhausted, right? It's just this ambient stress, it's this ambient fatigue because everything requires work mentally, right? This is what we call cognitive overload, okay? Chronic cognitive load. This is associated with reduced executive functioning. And executive functioning is that capacity we have in our brains to say, I can get from point A to point B and know all the steps there, right? And it also increases decision fatigue. So, have you guys ever gotten to a point where you're like, I'm just tired of deciding? I don't want to decide what's for dinner. I don't want to decide what mom wears today. I don't want to decide what we watch on TV, right? That's because you're tired. It's like if you think about weightlifting, right? If you're holding something heavy, after a while, you know, you have the strength to do it, but after a while, those muscles get fatigued, right? And it's less, um, it's not as easy to hold it at the height that you had been in the beginning, right? So you start to drag a little bit, your muscles start to droop a little bit. Maybe you know, shift positions into one hand so you could shake the other one out, right? Our brains are the same way. So when you're carrying all of this in your brain all the time without ever being able to put it down or to catch your breath or to shake it out, um, it can start to decrease our capacity to carry the things, right? So you may see an increase in mental fog, right? Why did I just walk in this room? Where are my glasses that are red on my face, right? Or they say something, hey, what's for dinner? And you just draw a blank, right? And it's not because you aren't capable, it's because you are capable and you've had people rely on your capacity to be capable for a long time. Okay. You can only run so far without stopping for a, you know, to catch your breath and a drink of water, right? Which is why oftentimes when you come to these trainings with me, I tell you it's okay to rest. It's necessary. Caring for you is caring for them, right? Because I know that you're capable, but we're looking for sustainability. Okay. Your capacity is there, but just like all things, running at full throttle will eventually you'll run out of gas. Okay. So I try to encourage you all to replenish as much as you can. And that replenishing looks different for everybody, right? Sometimes it's a day off, sometimes it's a trip somewhere, sometimes it's some indulgent thing, but sometimes it's just I need to maybe outsource some of this to somebody else, right? Or I need to find a better system or a better tool to kind of hold the mental scaffolding for me for a little while so that I can think more clearly, right? That nervous system repair needs to take place, okay? So the brain stays in this low level vigilance. So what does that mean? Well, we all know what vigilance is, right? Vigilance is where you are ready and prepping for any potential harm or shift, right? A problem to be solved. And you're always in this space, okay? You may not be like hyped up, panicking, ready to fight somebody or whatever, but you are looking for, okay, well, mom's kind of a little unbalanced. I need to make sure she doesn't fall when she gets up to use the restroom, right? Or, you know, Johnny's going to go and play with a new group of friends, and I'm not sure if they're going to be able to understand that he, you know, has sensory processing problems, right? And so you got to kind of be aware of like, you know, the damage control if things go awry there, right? So always thinking and always preparing for maybe not worst case scenario, but definitely disruptive scenarios, that's always running in the background, right? We might not be always forethought of it, like it's right there running across our brain, but our subconscious is always calculating potential harm, okay? Even just for ourselves, when you add somebody who's delicate or fragile or vulnerable onto it, it goes in overdrive, okay? And that's tiring. Ongoing planning uses that working memory, right? So you're actively planning, you're actively strategizing, you're actively working out the logistics and the timing of everything, okay? You're anticipating needs, okay? And that can prevent a full mental rest, okay? Got all my tasks done for the day. I'm going to lay down or I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch a movie, but I know within 25 minutes, dad's going to get up and need to use the restroom, right? And I'm going to have to do that. And that's okay. That's the job. But I'm just trying to make you see that there is a reason why you're always tired, okay? And fatigue can occur without visible activity, okay? So you might be on the surface, think about like a duck on the water, right? Just kind of coasting along, and everyone's like, wow, that's smooth. They've got it. But underneath the water, the little legs are just, right? Just kicking and flailing and pushing as hard as they can to propel that body forward, okay? So you might not see all the stuff that you're doing, but you feel all the stuff that you're doing, right? And then you sit down at the end of the day and you're like, wow, all I did today was go to the grocery store. And yet I feel like I ran a marathon because mentally you did. Mentally you did run a marathon. But if you don't have a visible activity that you can link back to your fatigue, then oftentimes we run that loop of, I shouldn't be this tired. Today wasn't even that hard. This isn't a big deal. Anybody else could just do this and be fine. Or I used to be able to go to the grocery store and not be exhausted by the end of the day, right? So you start comparing yourself to other people. You start comparing yourself to who you were prior to caregiving, or even who you were at the beginning of your caregiving before the needs intensified. And so then we start to feel guilty. We start to feel shame. We start to feel inadequate. And guess what? That's also exhausting. So you're kind of caught in this very sticky loop, okay? That's not uncommon and it's not abnormal, but it is something we can redirect, okay? So when the labor is invisible, it is often misunderstood, right? So again, when you're seen as not doing much, when you're actually doing a great deal behind the scenes, that can lead to resentment, right? Especially if people in your life are full of opinions and helpful advice, but they aren't taking a whole lot of action, okay? Well, why don't you just do it like this? Well, have you tried that? Yeah, like 4 years ago, right? Um, it can lead to isolation. It can lead to self-doubt, right? So when we recognize the experiences, when we recognize the labor, it changes things. It changes how we view ourselves and it changes how we view our scenario, right? So it's not always I need to try harder. It's, I need to accept the reality I'm in. It's already hard, right? And over time, that lack of recognition can increase strain, not just physically, but relationally and emotionally with the extended people who maybe aren't as involved, or even with the one who you're caring for, right? Because they might be thinking, well, you're just taking me to the doctor, or, you're just washing my clothes for me. But they don't realize that all of their the execution of their life is now on your shoulders on top of the execution of your own life, right? And that takes a lot. And so the problem isn't that you need to work harder. The problem is sometimes that most of your work isn't being seen or named, right? And so when you acknowledge the experience, you acknowledge the workload, it validates your effort, which is good, right? Validation is a great remedy to shame. Recognizing your load supports communication, right? Because if you're like, I should be able to handle this, this shouldn't be that hard, then that, again, that's all on you. And you're like, I'm not going to ask somebody to help me to do something that shouldn't be this hard. right? And so we invalidate our own experiences over and over and over again when we don't reach out for help, okay? Recognizing your workload helps you to explain your workload to people, right? Someone says, well, what did you do today that made you so tired? Oh, I did some laundry and I made some dinner. And then me and mom sat down and watched a movie. And they're like, okay. But you're not telling them all the stuff going on in your mind, right? Well, we got a doctor's appointment tomorrow, which means I got to wake up at 6:30 because if I don't wake up in time for her to get her medicine, she's not going to want to eat her dinner and then or breakfast. And if she doesn't eat breakfast, she can't take her medication. If she doesn't take her medication, she's going to be aggressive, right? Oh, while you're trying to watch a movie, okay? And acknowledging the workload allows you to understand what you need for support, okay? Oftentimes you say, well, somebody says, well, tell me what to do. What can I do to help you? And you draw a blank. I don't know, because you don't understand all that you're doing, because you never sat and thought about it, because maybe it just kind of crept up on you, right? We talked about that role creep a couple weeks ago, where it's like, well, I started off and I was fine, and now it's just this huge thing, and I don't know what happened, right? Because it was gradual, it was slow. You got time to acclimate to the load that you didn't realize how much you ended up carrying, right? So let me give you a few real world scenarios, because invisible labor shows up in many everyday caregiving situations, right? The constant monitoring, I think, is probably one that is the most prevalent across all caregiving roles, regardless of who you're caring for, and is probably the one that takes up the most mental space, right? Um, Especially again, if you have medication adjustments, right? Or if you're trying something new, say you, okay, well, I want respite, so I'm going to take Johnny to the adult daycare center so that he can have a couple hours of, activity with his peers. And I'm going to go have, a day with my friend, right? Well, then that can go awry because Johnny isn't used to that space. He doesn't know these people. Things are different. He's got to wear a sweater that's super itchy and he's not happy about that, right? So then you get him home and it all explodes, right? And then you got to deal with that. It's like, wow, my restful morning is now shot to crap, right? Because now I'm dealing with this, right? That's a lot. Keeping track of paperwork, right? I have many caregivers say, well, mom and dad didn't prepare for this stage of their life. And so now I don't know where anything is. I don't know where their insurance is. I don't know what they're eligible for, right? So you got to be a detective now and you got to figure out, okay, well, where did they put that paper? Do they even have that paper? Who's their agent? What, you don't know, right? And then even when you do know, things change so much, you got to refigure it out, right? Anticipating needs before they become urgent, okay? Especially if you have somebody who can't communicate things to you very well, okay? Especially if you're taking care of maybe a young person who is learning how to manage their emotions and their sensitivities. And so they don't know when they're about to tip over, but you do, right? You're the person who remembers, who reminds, who follows up, right? And of course, these tasks don't always come with a visible outcome, but they are essential to keeping your world functioning, okay? So I hope you see that these are all adding up and nobody's going to see it happen. It just does happen, okay? And the expectation is that you're just going to do it, right? So how can we help this? Most of you are in a scenario where it's not going to change, at least not to where it makes things easier, right? In fact, it might be the opposite. Yes, it will change and it's going to be harder. That's a reality, okay? But one simple helpful step is just acknowledging that the invisible labor is real labor, okay? It's not just daydreaming, it's not just, imagining things in your head, and it's not just, thinking about things in a thoughtful way or, being pensive, okay? It's actual logistic, structural scaffolding that you're creating so that everything in the outside world, right, anything outside of your brain works efficiently. Okay, that's a lot. So one thing that you can do that may be helpful is to externalize your cognitive load. So what does that mean? Writing things down, right? Um, my kiddos all have ADHD, and I am often working at a very high cognitive capacity. And sometimes I feel like my brain gets so tired and their brain gets so tired, it just starts dumping things out. They're like non-essential. So we're just going to forget that you even heard this information, right? So I like to keep things contained outside of my brain, right? So writing them down, sharing a task list, right? Maybe even just writing down not all the things that you did in one day, but all the things that you managed mentally in one day, right? Naming invisible tasks and conversations with family members or providers can reduce them misunderstanding the job. Even if it doesn't change the circumstances, they may be able to realize, oh, yeah, now I see that is a lot more than just making an extra plate at dinner time, right? Using calendars with reminders can be very, very helpful. There's a gajillion apps out there that are designed for this kind of stuff that are very helpful. But I would just always encourage you, if you do adopt a structure or you're trying something out and it doesn't work for you, it doesn't fit the way your world works, don't be discouraged and think that I'm just not good at this. Okay. There's a million different ways that you can do the same task, and you just have to find the one that works best for you and makes the most sense for your nervous system, your biology, and your day to day, right? Recognizing your own invisible labor can reduce that internal pressure and that self-criticism. Okay. And I think that's really the main point of this whole presentation. Don't sell yourself short with the amount of work that you do. Okay. And I would say a lot of you probably are very aware of the physical work you do, but the mental and emotional and strategic work that you do, maybe you don't put as much weight into, because, culturally we just don't do that, right? So when you externalize your mental labor, write it all down, put it in a calendar or what have you, it's easier to delegate. If people ask you for help, you can say, I need help in these areas, right? You can maybe prioritize automated things like automated bill pay, maybe even automatic grocery delivery or pickup, right? There's a lot of things that you can like subscribe to, things that you know you're going to need often. A lot of e-commerce, businesses will allow you to set that kind of stuff up. Prescriptions usually are really good about that. You can get prescription delivery. I think CVS, if you have if you join like their CVS members club, it's like $5 a month or something like that. They do free delivery. Okay. So we live in a world that is very convenience focused. You just have to kind of seek out what's actually convenient and what's just another thing you got to deal with, right? Because not everything is worth your time, but there's a lot of stuff out there that is. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, identifying areas where support could be added. Okay. So not everybody is going to volunteer to come and, help you with bathing. Okay. Not everyone's going to come and help you with, finances, unfortunately. But they may be able to help you with some of these other things, right? But unless you know what it is and what you're doing and what would actually be respite for you, you're not going to be able to ask them to fill in the gaps if you don't know where they are. Okay. So a few takeaways. I told you this would be kind of short, which is fine. Invisible labor is real and very demanding. Okay. Much of caregiving labor is invisible, but that does not make it insignificant. Okay. Cognitive and emotional labor require real energy, and that contributes to exhaustion. Okay. Again, your brain takes up almost all of the energy that we consume. And so if you have a high responsibility role like caregiving, you're going to be maxed out pretty quick. Okay. You're going to be tapped out real quick. It's like you're heavy lifting in the gym every day, multiple reps. Okay. So we have to be aware of that. When invisible labor goes unrecognized, guess what? Strain increases, not because you aren't capable, but because the work isn't being seen. Okay. And so the expectation of others, and even some of the expectations we put on ourselves, can be very unrealistic because we forget to factor in this huge chunk of energy zapping stuff that we do every day, right? Naming invisible labor helps reduce misunderstanding and supports sustainability over time. Okay. And awareness supports better support planning. Okay. So when people say, what can I do to help? You're better equipped to answer that question. But it takes some reflection on what goes on behind the scenes every day, what exhausts you, what fatigues you the most. Okay. And of course, you can't delegate everything. But sometimes even just getting people to understand why you're so tired can be respite in and of itself, right? All right, so we do have some time now. I'm gonna stop my recording